So today we're going to talk about a low-carb diet, exactly what that entails, what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, and how does it all work out. And if you really want to lose weight with a low-carb diet, this is what I'm going to focus on today. And this is what Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution book talks about, because that's where most people want to start. After you've lost your weight and you're down to whatever your playing weight is, then you can add back a few carbs, the ones that you really missed and so forth. And so you balance things out then. And Dr. Atkins' basic formula, as I said in the last video, is that you don't want to exceed in one day 20 grams of carbs, which is basically minuscule. And the best way to figure out the number of grams in different foods is to go online. And if you put in carbohydrate content of foods, you'll find that there are all kinds of websites that you can get long tables of just about everything under the sun. And you should look through all those. I've recently done that. I like the Dr. Atkins or the Atkins tables better than anything else, because I think that they come down right to the nitty gritty and do the trick. But there's other things as well. And as I said before, the dietdoctor.com is also a very good website if you're thinking about these kinds of things. And after you do that, then you find out, that there are some foods that have, 10, 20, 30, 60, 100 grams, 300 grams. And so you start to see what the gamut is on all of this business, which then leads you to the next thing, and that is you have to read the labels. As you're going down the grocery aisle, you pick up whatever on the back, because this is now, regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You have the whole thing. You have a breakdown of a serving size, which is also another way they hedge things, because you don't know, my serving size may be smaller or bigger than somebody else's serving size. So anyways, so they tell you what a serving size is. They tell you how many grams of carbs and fat and protein. They tell you then how many grams of sugar, and then they have they don't tell you. This is what they don't tell you. So they tell you the grams of carbs, and they tell you the grams of sugar, and they tell you the grams of fiber. Well, fiber is a layman's term for cellulose. Cellulose is what plants make to form their skeletons, so it's the barks on the trees and so forth, and it's what gives structure to all plants, and we cannot digest and absorb cellulose. So fiber is what's supposed to keep you regular. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But anyway, for them they hedge. See what the USDA has done. They give you carbohydrates, sugar, fiber. But that, if you add it up, it doesn't add up to 100% of whatever the carbohydrate content of that food is. Well, the rest is starch. They don't talk about starch. They act like it doesn't exist. So you just have to know that, and then in your mind you say, well, that's starch. And what starch is a great big polymer of sugar. So it's the same thing, really. It takes a little bit longer when you eat starch, like pasta or potato or bread, it goes into your stomach. Your stomach starts to break up the polymer molecules, break the chemical bonds. A lot happens in the stomach, and then it passes down into the small intestine, where it gets more digested and so forth. Ultimately, it ends up to be individual glucose molecules that then can be absorbed through the mucosa of the intestine and into the bloodstream, and then just get distributed. So you have to think about starch as just another form of sugar, really. And the other thing that you have to put into your mind is that's poison. You don't want that. That'll kill you. It'll give you diabetes and kill you. Now, I'm just being a little melodramatic here, but that's really the message. So in order to deplete your body of stored sugar and starch, you have to be on a very low carbohydrate diet for at least 3 days. And most of the carbohydrate that's stored in your body is in your liver, and it's stored. The name of the of the molecules that they store is glycogen, but it's basically a big starch molecule. And it's stored in there, and then it's broken down and distributed as glucose, goes into your bloodstream, and you use that then to burn for energy. And that's what the athletes, the marathoners, when they carb up the night before the race, they're basically building up. When they go to the Italian restaurants and they eat pasta all day long the day before the race. They're carving up, they're putting glycogen into their livers. But as I said the other day, if and when they hit the wall, their glycogen stores are all gone. And they can't necessarily convert rapidly to start utilizing fat to burn. And so that's when they just sort of drop there on the track and can't finish the race. Then the question is, so what, if you're on a low-carb diet and you're trying to lose weight, what do you eat? What can you eat? Well, the answer to that is that you eat meat and fish. And any meat is fine. Poultry, red meat, the pork, the white meat, everything. And the best way to cook those meats is to either saute them with olive oil and butter, or to grill them. Both ways are fine. And you have to remember to tell yourself, don't be afraid of that olive oil and butter. My wife Lynn has a sign in our kitchen that one of our kids' families gave us for Christmas one year. It says, if you're afraid of butter, use cream, Julia Child. And so Julia, she popularized French cooking and at the time that the United States was going crazy over fat. Fat was terrible, fat was bad, and so forth. And so that was her way of saying, well, you know what, cream is basically butter with a lot of the liquid removed. Same thing, really. So that's why it's such a great sign. But anyway, don't be afraid of eating fat. You can, as Atkins said, you can eat as much fat as you want, and you'll still lose weight as long as you're carb restricted and depleted. Which brings me to another point that I'll finish up with, and that is, it takes you 3 days to become carb depleted. So if you cheat and you go out and you have a couple of drinks and then you lose all your inhibitions, and then you chow down on that great big piece of apple pie a la mode or whatever, you then have repleted your liver of glycogen stores, and it's going to take you another 3 days to get back to where you were. And you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you do that. So the other thing that I think that Julia Child and the French, and I'm a little bit biased onto the French way of preparing food, they got, one of the things that they've done in order to make particularly the meats and the fish palatable and tastier and even really better than just simple grilling, which is fine, but and it's not all that tasty, is to make sauces. My wife Lynn has been teaching me how to make sauces, so I've become I'm the saucier sous chef. It's hard to say that in our house, and I've come to appreciate what they do for you. What you do when you make a sauce is that you boil down you put one ingredient into the saucepan, and you put it on high heat, and you boil it down until it's just almost gone. And then you add the next ingredient and you do the same thing, you bring that down. And so over the course of depending on how many ingredients you put in that sauce, you've got the essence of everything. And then you just take that and you dribble that onto your prepared meat or fish. And you're a gourmet. I recommend that. I think the best thing you can do is go out and buy Julia Child's cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, which was her first book. And she tells you everything you need to know. She leaves nothing out. And that's what you need when you're learning how to do these sorts of things. The other thing that you can, so before we leave the meat, you don't want to eat Southern style fried chicken. You know what that is they take the chicken and they bread it, or they put flour all over the whole thing, and then they drop it in the deep fat fryer. The deep fat frying, that's okay, but not the bread. You're shooting yourself into the foot, because now you're eating both carbohydrate and fat, and ultimately you'll become fat if you do that. So you just stay away from deep fried anything, because anything that's deep fried in our society has been breaded or floured first. So the other thing you can eat are veggies. And of course, the low-fat diet people just go bonkers on veggies. And some of them have gone to the point where they've become vegetarian, and so they've excluded all animal products. But veggies, the only thing you have to know about veggies is that if they're green, you can eat them, number one. Number two, if they grow above the ground, you can eat them. If they grow below the ground, and particularly if they're not green, like they're red or they're yellow or whatever, you can't eat them. Because what those things that grow below the ground are, even though they're a plant, and so we call them a vegetable. Potatoes are vegetable. Well, they're 100% starch. And carrots are the same way. And beets, they use beets to extract sugar out of. And then turnips and parsnips and squash. Well, squash is above the ground, but it's not green. So any of those things, you just avoid them. You just don't eat them. People worry about becoming vitamin deficient. And there's two different kinds of vitamins. There's water-soluble vitamins that are found in plants and green leafy vegetable plants, or fat-soluble vitamins, and those are found in animal products, meat and so forth. So if you're worried about becoming vitamin deficient, and that's hard to do in our country today, but take 1-a-day brand vitamins and you'll be fine. Now, the other thing to watch out for, to have your doctor measure, is vitamin B12 that is found in meat and meat products. And it's important to make red blood cells and also to make your central nervous system work well and so forth. And it's an important vitamin. And then another vitamin is folic acid. Folate is found in green leafy vegetables. So you can buy at the store. You can buy B12 and folate together, and so forth and so on. So before I would do that, I'd have their doctor. They can measure those levels. So, and if they're fine, you don't have to really worry about them. So salads are wonderful. So salads are primarily cellulose. Fiber, because the lettuce is essentially mostly non-digestible, but it's a good carrier for the salad dressing. Now, the best salad dressing, if you're on a low-carb diet, is vinegar and oil. And don't doctor it up. Don't put any sugar in it. And the thing is if you're out to eat, you have to worry about that, because the chefs all know that people like it. If it tastes sweet, they like it. And so in a restaurant, people will do all kinds of things to the different kinds of salad dressings. But you can also have them bring you the vinegar and the oil in a little rack to the table, and you can do it yourself. And that's what I recommend. Then you know what you're doing. The other thing is that is just wonderful on a low-carb diet are eggs. Eggs, they're low calorie. They only have 70 calories in one egg. And it's all protein and fat and cholesterol. They're great. And so eggs and bacon and sausage and all what you'll find on a low-carb diet is that you'll find all these foods that you've been avoiding forever because they have a lot of fat in them. But they taste really good. And so eggs and bacon are the way to go. So that's what you can eat. Now, what to avoid? What cannot you eat? Anything that's white, you don't eat it. So potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, all that's starch. You don't want to eat any of that stuff. So when you go to the restaurant and the waiter comes to the table and brings the bread basket, tell them to take it back. You don't want it, because it's hard to, and I know this for sure, it's hard to sit there and look at that bread basket and you're having a drink, and it's the end of the day, and you're tired, and so forth, or you're talking to your mate and going over all the bad things that happened that day. And it's so easy to pick up and have that piece of bread, but don't do that. So tell the waiter to take it away. Milk, don't drink milk. And I know that's sort of antithetical to the most Americans. It's sort of like my mother used to tell me when I was a little kid growing up to drink my milk, and that there were kids in Europe that were starving. I could never figure out what kids in Europe had to do with me. But anyway, but milk has sugar in it. The sugar is called lactose. It's got its own sugar. And it's sweet. So, and you know what's happened in the low fat decades that we've been accustomed to. We have various kinds of milks nowadays. We have 2% fat, 1% fat. We have skim milk, and so forth. And as they take out the fat, they have fortified the milk with more and more sugar. They add sugar to it, because otherwise it just tastes terrible, really. It doesn't taste good at all. So if you like milk, that's the bad news, is forget about milk. But you can put heavy cream in your coffee. And you know, once you do that once, you'll never go back. It's delicious. That's what the farmers used to put into their coffee, the dairy farmers. They would take the cream off the top, and they would, and you see, that's the other thing I wanted to mention. That I've mentioned that before. If you let milk sit, or if you centrifuge it, the fat rises to the top. So the fat's lighter than the water and everything else. And that's why when we store fat in our bodies, it's the lightest form of energy that we can make it in order to keep it stored. And the reason being is it's excluded the water. I was just at the grocery store yesterday, and we bought a great big thing of water. I almost broke my back getting it into the car. Yeah, that stuff heavy. And so cream in the coffee, forget about milk. And of course, in addition to all the other things that you don't want to eat desserts. So you don't want to eat chocolates, you don't want to eat candy, you don't want to eat Snickers bars. I used to, when I was on my low-calorie restricted diet, I wouldn't eat breakfast, I wouldn't eat lunch. And like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would be famished. So I'd go to the machines in the medical school, and I'd get myself a Snickers bar, cup of coffee. It's so good. But that's not a good way to go. So then that brings up the question, so what do you do for snacks? Well, there's another good news about the low-carb diet. You discover all kinds of foods that you've been avoiding for years and years and years that are great for snacks. For example, olives. Olives are just wonderful. The other thing are nuts, and there's all kinds of different kinds of nuts, almonds and cashews and Brazil nuts and so forth. And they're really good. And just with a little handful, it'll basically satisfy your cravings if you want to eat and it's not time for dinner yet. The other thing is cheese. I discovered a whole cacophony of cheeses that are really interesting to eat, number one, and they're delicious, and they're wonderful, and and they're very, very satisfying in terms of appetite satisfying. And I didn't really understand where cheeses came from until just recently, actually, and in one of the classes I was taking, they were going over cheese making in France. And they basically explained that back in the day, you know, this was the way you could save milk. You know, so you milk the cow, you have to drink it. But if you can't drink it all, what do you do with it? Well, you make cheese out of it, and the cheese can sit away room temperature, and wait for the next, you know, for a rainy day. And that was how cheese came into being, as far as I've been taught so far. So then, the other thing that comes up when you're on a diet is, what about alcohol? So here's some other good news with regard to a low-carb diet. Ethanol is basically 2 carbons, and with hydrogens on all around, and on the end of it is a what we call a hydroxyl group, an alcohol group. So that's ethanol. And ethanol, when it goes into your system and basically goes from your GI tract up into your liver, is treated as if it's a fat in terms of how ethanol is metabolized. So it's not a sugar, it's a fat. So you can drink on a low-carb diet. It's wonderful. In terms of, but you don't want to mix it with a lot of sugar. That's just shooting yourself into the foot again. And so if you want to drink on a low-carb diet, the best thing to drink are the spirits. And of the spirits, the best things to drink are vodka and gin. And then the ones that have colors, like the bourbons and the scotches and so forth, they might have a little bit of carbohydrate, 1 gram or something, but nothing to worry about, really. So you can have your bourbon on the rocks and so forth. And martini comes with an olive in it. That's even better, you know. So wine. Now wine is fine if it's dry wine, red or white. Doesn't make any difference. There's just a few grams of carbs in a 6-ounce glass of wine. And a 6-ounce glass of wine is equivalent to a 12-ounce beer in terms of the amount of alcohol in it. And now, because people have started worrying about carbs, you know, all the beer companies have come out with low-carb beers. Michelob Ultra was the first. But now, I just went online before when I put this talk together, and everybody's got, and they've cut the carbohydrates down to 2.5 grams. In terms of, that's really light beer. And so, you know, that's good. You have a couple of beers, you only had 5 grams of carbs, and you can, if you haven't had anything else to eat that day, you've stayed below your 20-gram limit. So that's what, and the only thing wrong with drinking when you're trying to lose weight is it messes up your brain, your mind. And so it loosens those inhibitions. That's why you find yourself saying things to one of your frenemies that you wouldn't ordinarily say, you know, tell him he's an idiot and so forth. And so if you lose your inhibitions in terms of not eating carbs, you'll find yourself having that dessert that evening after a bottle of wine or whatever. Now, if you go onto this diet in order to try to lose weight, there's one thing that's absolutely essential, I think, and that is what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to that point where your metabolism is not using sugar for energy, it's using fat for energy, and if you're really carb depleted, then you're going to be metabolizing your fat 1/3 as efficiently as it ought to be, or as it usually is. So that means you burn 3 molecules of fat to get the same amount of energy that you ordinarily would get from 1 molecule of fat. And so that's where you want to be. Now, what happens to the molecules that are being burned is that they don't go all the way through the metabolic sequence. And what happens to them is that they get changed to ketones. Now, ketones you have to take some organic chemistry if you really want to know what those are, but they're basically just a breakdown product of the fat molecule into fragments that have a ketone group on them. And so you can measure ketones. You can actually, they come out in your breath and they come out in your urine. And so you can measure the ketones in your urine. And this is what the good thing is on this diet, because you can get these things. And I went out today and got these at the store. This is a little bottle that you can get, and they've got inside, they have a whole bunch of these little strips. And so on the end of the strip there, up here, is a little detecting device, and you dip it in your urine, or you pee on it, and then you match it up to this color scheme here. So this is basically no ketones, and this is a lot of ketones over here. It turns purple. Now, and so you can see, if you cheat on this diet, you'll see it the next morning in your urine. And because you'll know where you were before you went out drinking that night, ate that dessert, and then the next day you don't have as many ketones, or they're back to normal. It's gone. And so this is really great because you can monitor yourself and you can know, and that gives you help in terms of not cheating on your diet. Because you say to yourself, well, I was just really beautiful this morning. Purple, talk about purple. I was really purple. And then, so you don't want to destroy all that good work you've done. So I don't want to, I hesitated to do this, but I'm going to leave on a sort of I don't know, maybe not the best note to leave on. But if you stick onto this low carb diet for a while, a few weeks anyway, what may happen to you is that you become constipated. Now, the reason you become constipated is because you're not taking in enough fiber. Because there's an awful lot of stuff that you on a standard American diet that is loaded with fiber. So what you can do, and I would recommend this if you're going to go on one of these diets to try to lose weight and so forth, I would just start taking fiber pills. You can buy them at the drugstore. And a brand name is Metamucil, and you just there are a couple of small capsules. Pop a couple of those every morning. You probably won't notice anything, but as time goes on, they'll stand you in good stead. And if you need to go further in terms of laxative, magnesium really works well. I forgot to tell that to my brother, who I convinced to go on this diet, and he got constipated, and he called me up. He lives in LA, and he was screaming at me from the other coast and all this other stuff. And so it's important that you take that into consideration. So I'm going to stop there because I think I've covered the waterfront. And I think that, it's not only just a diet to lose weight, it's a lifestyle diet. And if you stay on that diet, I guarantee you, if you keep to an American style diet with greater than 300 grams of carbs every day, like the USDA says, and together with a lot of fat in your diet, you're going to gain weight and you're going to get diabetic, and you don't want to do that. So this is a lifestyle thing, and it's based on biology and evolution, and I think it's the way to go. So I'll leave you there.